In today's video on reading the Bible, I want to explore a good second question to ask while reading the epistles. Now this implies that there's a first question, and there is. That was the topic of our last video. So if you haven't seen that video yet, watch that first. When reading the epistles, a good first question to ask is, what did this say to them? But once you've answered that question, you then move to a good second question, what does this say to us? This movement from the first question to the second question is key to a more accurate interpretation and application. Let's do this with 1 Peter 4, 1 through 2. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. What did this say to them? Peter said to them, as you guys suffer for Jesus, imitate the attitude of Jesus. Then you will be doing God's will more and therefore sinning less. Now again, we got that answer in the last video, so make sure you watch that. Now we move to the second question. What does this say to us? Two guidelines help us with that movement. Guideline number 1. When the particulars then match the particulars today, the answer remains the same. If what was going on back then with them is the same as what's going on today with us, then the same answer, the same message applies. As the saying goes, some things never change. We all need water, we all need food, people are people, we can love, we can hate. These things were true in the first century, they're true today, and they will be true in the future when we all have an iPhone 53. Well, in the case of 1 Peter, Christians were physically persecuted. They had the choice of what attitude they were going to live with. They had evil human desires, and they had the ability to live with the will of God. And all of those particulars can be true for us today. And so the answer remains the same. What does this say to us? As we suffer for Jesus, we are to imitate the attitude of Jesus. Then we will be doing God's will more and therefore sinning less. But what if we're dealing with a passage that has some cultural things back then that aren't happening today? Well, that's where we need a second guideline. Guideline number 2. When the particulars then are different than the particulars today, find the principle that applies. Here's an example. Colossians 2, 16 through 17. Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Now, I've never had anyone tell me to celebrate a new moon festival or to keep the Jewish food laws. So we find the principle. What does this say to us? Here's the principle. Don't let people tell you that you need to follow certain cultural rules or traditions to be a Christian. Christianity begins and ends with faith in Jesus. Now, I like that principle. I'm pretty confident with that, but our work is not done. Many people come up with principles from 1 or 2 verses that are actually not biblical. And so what we're going to do is pass our principle through a filter. If you've ever sifted for gold, you know what this process looks like. You take a handful of elements, you put it in a sifter, kind of like a filter, a strainer, and you strain it so that the big stuff stays on top, the small stuff falls. Then you take the small stuff and you put it in a different filter, and you keep doing that till all that remains are tiny particles so that you can see them and pick out the gold specks, the gold particles. Well, we are going to put our principle through a 3-question filter. First filter, does the principle fit the context of the section? This is key. Whenever you read the epistles, you need to think section more than sentence. Think big picture, big chunks when interpreting the epistles. In our case, yes, the entire section speaks against those who are putting tradition and rules above faith. Second filter, does the principle fit with other scriptures in the Bible? In our case, again, yes. We see throughout the Bible that Christianity is about faith in Jesus. Now, there are commands in the New Testament. There are a few things from the Old Testament that transfer to the New Testament. And while those are important, the principle still applies that Christianity begins and ends with faith in Jesus. Third filter, does the principle fit with the message of salvation through faith in Jesus? In our case, the answer is clearly yes. Now, you might think that this is a really tedious process when reading the epistles, and it is, but it's an important process to avoid misinterpretation. When you answer the first question, what did this say to them, and then move to the second question, what does this say to us, while keeping in mind the guidelines and filters, you increase your chances of having an accurate interpretation and application. But with all of that said, some passages in the epistles are just plain difficult to interpret. So we have to stay humble, and we have to determine what we are willing to die for, debate, or discuss. Again, a good first question to ask when reading the epistles, what did this say to them? And then you move to a good second question, what does this say to us? This has been an episode of Reading the Bible. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this, and make sure to visit our website, valleybrookchurch.org.